Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Savoldi. I'm a retired college professor. I taught at California State Polytechnic University, located in Pomona, California. I had two positions. My faculty position was farrier science instructor for animal and veterinarian sciences. My staff position was resident farrier for the W.K. Kellogg Arabian Horse Center located on the Cal Poly campus. I held both those positions for 30 years. Today, welcome everyone. Today, I would like to define the heel of the equine foot. It's fascinating. And I would like to share with you a lot of the things that we can find within the heel to help us identify the heel. Our lecture content. We will discuss the plane of the hoof capsule, the moisture line, frog wall junction. We'll define the heel angle, evaluating the heel, and trimming the heel. Now, there's two words in there that might be a little confusing, and that's the moisture line and the frog wall junction. These are terms not used very often, but they are critical to understand when we want to evaluate detail within the foot. So, anatomy. We're going to use some gross anatomy pictures here, photographic gross anatomy, and we're using cadaver limbs. They were purchased for research purposes and educational purposes only. So let's look at a lateral view of a horse's hoof with the wall removed. We can see the hairline and we can see the hoof wall. This is the internal hoof wall, something that we don't get to see with our eye. And then we can add to this our coronary cushion, sensitive lamina, and an area where the sole body interfaces with the white line and hoof wall. This area is very uniform in its vertical depth, making it a very reliable standard, often referred to as uniform sole thickness. So a base. We always need a base to understand the capsule and what position the capsule is in and what position the P3 bone may be in. So a base, the sole plane, is my starting point because it's, again, very reliable. A unique feature about anatomy is where the sole interfaces with the white line in the hoof wall. The sole body may vary in its vertical depth due to areas of stress and may not be uniform in its vertical depth. We will refer to this area and this area only as uniform sole thickness. So I have a very young foot here. I have a very young sole body out of a horse's foot, extremely young. So our sole body has an arch. It's an arch structure. The arch is capable of collapsing. And we have our sole connection to wall. In other words, this is what we will refer to as uniform sole thickness, because one of the unique features about this, it is very uniform in its vertical depth. There's reasons why it may not be uniform, but as a guide, it's very consistent. So now we can discuss the moisture line of the sole. Look closely at this picture. We can see two parts to the sole where it connects to wall. We see some awful rough-looking material on the bottom of this foot. That is excess sole. That's simply healthy cells that are losing their moisture and drying out. They're getting too far away, they're migrating too far away from the nourishment, and they start to dry out. When a horse sloughs its sole, it will slough it at the moisture line, because that's where the moisture content of the sole is becoming very weak. It does not have a strong bond to it any longer. We can remove the excess sole and take a good look now at the sole, a dense epidermal structure. The sole is epidermal structure, but it is a very specialized epidermal structure. And then wall length beyond the sole plane. So we will discuss a lot about any wall length beyond the sole plane. I'm hoping you can start to see why I choose to use the sole plane for the base of the animal. Trimming the heel. Now we can introduce the frog wall junction. This is an area where the moisture is receding. It's losing its bond. It's weak. It's losing its bond, and so it's separating from the tissue. Very unique. And if we should just place a line between the true heel and additional wall. So we can now look at the rear of a horse's foot. There's our moisture line, or our frog wall junction. And what do we see? Well, I'm hoping you see two different angles to the length of wall. The lateral wall is greater off the frog wall junction than the medial wall. You also see different angles. The medial wall, the bars are straight with the straighter wall angle. The lateral wall, the bars have an angle. The heel actually has that internal angle going in that direction, and the foot is wider. In other words, deep connoisseurs will be narrow, and straight bars will be narrow heels. As body weight descends into that load, or loads the rear half of the foot, the bars can collapse and widen. Thus, you get a wider foot. So shallow connoisseurs are usually wider heels because of the changes that the bars take. Deep connoisseurs are usually straighter heels because the bar angle is usually straighter. And we now can look at length of wall beyond the sole plane. They're not equal. Let's verify this. So we can take a foot and trim it to the sole plane. Trim it to the frog wall junction and remove the lateral wall or the medial wall and look at it, and we can see that it aligns, the moisture line aligns with the frog wall junction. This is a review. So here's our frog wall junction, trim to the frog wall junction, and here's our sole thickness. Now remember, vertical depth of the sole can vary to the sole body, can be thick or thin, where the sole connection to wall, uniform sole thickness, is usually very stable in its vertical depth. Let's look over the bottom of this foot. Where's the frog wall junction? Look closely. And now I'll show you the frog wall junction. But before I identify the frog wall junction for you, look at length of wall. Look at the area where the frog is naturally separating from the wall. I hate to call it a frog because it's actually a pad, and a pad has a lot of meaning where a frog is meaningless. So look closely where the pad is separating from the wall. That's your frog wall junction. Now the tissue's been shaved away from that area so it can be found. Carefully shaved away. If you go too high, you'll be in trouble if you get into the bulbs. You just take your knife and shave down the buttress until you expose the frog wall junction. But the medial heel is quite a bit longer than the lateral heel. There's our frog wall junction. Now we can see now we can evaluate how the back half of this foot is standing. It's in a lateral roll. You notice I'm not saying the whole foot is in a lateral roll because it's different in the toe. The toe on this foot's a little bit in a medial roll. So it's picking up a twist. It's not a level sole plane. It's a twisted sole plane. This has been trimmed to the frog wall junction. Basically, following the white line into the frog wall, into that area of the frog wall junction. And for those that have a good eye, you can see this is not a level foot. It is not a level sole plane. Identifying the heel. So we're going to use some terms here, and I'd like to try to clear this up for everyone. Horizontal and vertical planes. A horizontal plane, the plane tangent to the Earth's surface at the eye of the observer's position. A vertical plane is perpendicular to the plane of the horizon. And how do we measure vertical plane, the vertical depth? We're simply measuring the vertical plane of the structure we would like to measure. And I will use these terms a lot as far as vertical depth goes. The hoof anatomy. Here's our heel region. We've removed the wall in the heel area to identify different parts. We have our exfoliating sole. Excuse me. We have our moist, dense sole. We also have our dermal lamina. We see the coronary cushion, or the coronary band, and the ungual cartilage. All of that material is beneath the hairline of this foot, and that will vary. It has a lot to do also with the angle of the heel. Defining the heel, let's keep it simple. So our exfoliating tissue, our dense epidermal sole, and our dermal lamina. You notice I've switched some words around on that dense epidermal sole. Some people call it the shiny sole or the waxy sole. There's different reasons that people call it, but it is just dense epidermal sole tissue. We can remove the excess exfoliating tissue, and now we can divide our heel into two parts. The actual heel and length of wall. The plane of the capsule. Lifting the sole plane in the heel area. You notice I did not say lifting the capsule. Lifting the sole plane. Very important to understand, because our sole plane is our base. This is the base for the foot, for the whole animal right here. So when we lift the sole plane in the heel area, we're altering a lot of the internal structures. We could lift the sole plane in the toe area, or we could lift the sole plane on the medial or lateral side. And that has to affect the internal structures of this animal's foot, tendons, ligaments, etc. So we trim this foot to the sole plane. We have leaving excessive length of wall. Now let's do a little bit more. Let's remove the distal border of the hoof wall, and we can evaluate the sole plane. And as you can see, it appears to be uniform in its vertical depth. The distal portion of the hoof wall has been removed, exposing the sole plane. Evaluating the sole plane in the heel area. All right, now this cartoon picture that you see here with a P3 bone is what I find in horses that have feet that are functioning very well. And that is a P3 bone, the sole arch, and the hoof capsule are horizontally planed or ground level. It's critical that the P3 bone be at ground level, because pathology can be based on the plane of the P3 bone. So lifting the heel in the sole plane. So what I'm going to do is make a partial list of things that can go wrong when the heel's lifted, when the sole plane is lifted in the heel area. So for those of you that can do a screenshot, I would recommend doing this, or you can use your camera to take a photograph of this. Because what I would like you to do is when a horse has one of these problems, evaluate how the horse is standing on its foot. So let's start with pedal osteitis in the toe area of the P3 bone. Pedal osteitis simply means inflammation to bone. Well, if that's inflamed, the sole dermis will be stressed underneath it and maybe swollen. And it will lose bone structure, and the sole in the toe area may become thinner. Anterior-posterior sole drop, the sole arch. I like to use the word sole drop for a prolapse sole. So what do I mean by prolapse sole drop? Let's go back to our flexible model. If our P3 bone should be in a positive palmar angle, the arch sets the plane of the P3 bone. So how can our P3 bone be in a positive palmar angle in this foot? This side actually probably can see it a little bit better. You see, when the bone has good elevation, there's circulation in this area here. There's circulation right here when it's elevated. When the bone body weight, skeletal weight pushes this downward, that compresses tissue and retards circulation. And now we start to see damage. You see the lift that's developing here? The bone is pushing into this area. There'll be stress to the white line. This is remodeling of distal lamina. It's starting to keratinize. And so the white line is increasing in its vertical depth right here. But the sensitive lamina will be decreasing. So a positive palmar angle can crush the toe arch, can cause the toe arch to flatten, to drop down. So that's an anterior sole drop. I don't like to use the term positive and negative because people take negative as a bad thing and positive as a good thing. So what do people, the studies show that the P3 bone is in a positive palmar angle in a lot of the horses. So that's accepted as normal, but it's an unhealthy normal because pathology will be seen in the toe of a P3 bone in a positive palmar angle. That's due to a compressive load that's dropping down into the sole area. Now, a P3 bone can show pelosteitis in the toe area in a negative palmar angle because when the bone is pressing in the heel, it's going to lift off the toe. See that? Lift off the toe? Well, that puts tension on the dermis. And now we have inflammation, and now that can affect the bone. So bone stability is critical in maintaining healthy feet. We have to concentrate on bone stability. So let's go through this. That was our anterior-posterior sole drop. Damage to the sole dermis and sole body. We just discussed that. Stress on the main extensor tendon. Good one. Let's come back to our screen. Here I have a model of bones, a loose model of bones. But I'm going to use this cord. And I'm going to bring it down, and we're going to call this the main extensor tendon. I'm going to bring this cord down and attach it to the capsular ligament of the fetlock joint. Anyone that's done dissecting know that they have to cut the capsular ligament off of the fetlock joint. If you're not careful, you'll cut a hole right in your fetlock joint. Now, and then it continues down and attaches, this can be a strong attachment or a weak attachment to the proximal end of the P1 bone. If there's a lot of fascia involved here, it's a bit of a weak attachment, there's movement. But if it's a tight fascia horse, thin skin is usually tight fascia, so that will be a tighter attachment. Comes down and it partially attaches to the capsular ligament, to the pastern joint, and then comes down and attaches to the extensor process. So what happens to the tension? So always know where tissue connects, Because if you're going to alter a foot, you're going to alter those points of connection. So it connects here. Let's remember that it connects, our first connection is the capsular ligament. Now I'm going to raise the heel. Here's where we are. Now I'm going to raise the heel. You notice how our main extensor tendon gets tight? Where's the main pull? The main pull is on the capsular ligament of the fetlock joint. So you should start to see swelling developing. If you are dealing with a horse that has a good example, veterinarians would tell me to raise heels. Veterinarians, the management. I'm labor, he's management, or she. They tell me to raise the heel, I raise the heel. They keep working the horse. What happens? The next day, it probably has swollen fetlocks. One time I worked on a horse that was swollen for 2 years. They called me. I went down. It had heel. I took the heel away. They put the horse on a hot walker because they were cleaning the stall. And the swelling actually went away in 20 minutes. 2 years of swelling went away in 20 minutes. Now that's unheard of, but I think it was the exercise on the hot walker that did that. So just keep in mind what we're doing when we alter feet. The next one, stress, inflammation and swollen coronary cushion. That's a good one. Why is it? Upright horses, when the bones move through the limb on an upright horse, the P2 bone presses against the coronary cushion, which pushes it out. That also creates the upper curve to your hoof wall. The upper dish to your hoof wall is this. A thoroughbred horse, a low pastern horse, the skin pulls back. Upright pastern horses, everything's pushed out. So when you raise the heel on an upright pastern horse, you should expect to see swelling to the coronary cushion in this area and stress to the tissue around that area. Stress to the lateral branches of the suspensory ligament. This is one you can all look at. The suspensory ligament comes down the back of the leg. It attaches to the top and the sides of the sesamoids. Then it comes down and wraps around and attaches to the branches of the main extensor tendon. There's two. You have your medial and lateral branches of your suspensory ligament wrapping around this foot. But they'll attach to the main tendon, the extensor tendon, and also it attaches to bone. So when you raise the heel, they get very tight. Where do you see that mostly? On young horses out in a pasture. You're going out to trim a group of young, maybe yearlings. And some of them, it'll look like this suspensory ligament can be so tight as it look like guitar strings, and the skin will just be popping outward. Evaluate the heel. And it'll most likely have length of wall in the heel, because when you lower that heel, you relax that area. Remember, all this tissue must be under tension. So if you're taking tension off the tissue, it's a short period of time before it develops back into tension. They need to be on tension. Think about that when you raise a heel on a laminitic horse. You're releasing the tension on the deep flexor tendon, but for a very short amount of time. But you're stressing all of this other tissue. Bowed superficial flexor tendon is another one. It comes down here. Where does it attach? It attaches right into this superficial, right into this area. So when you raise the heel, you change the angle, because usually you'll get a fetlock angle change. Raising the heel generally drops this. There's two ways of changing pastern. One is altering the foot. You can change the angle of this. That's not a good way to try to straighten the angle here, because it's the arch that sets the pastern angles. If you have a collapsed, a dropped posterior sole drop, negative plane P3 bone, what's that do to bone alignment? When the arch collapses in the heel, you get this kind of movement. Wait, this kind of movement. If the arch is collapsing in the toe, you get this kind of movement in your joint alignments. So you have to adjust the arch. I'm getting off track, I'm sorry. Both swollen fetlocks, I think we talked about that earlier. Hawk injections is a great one because I've had a handful of horses that were getting hawk injections. And they all were shod when they called me in. They were all shod, hind feet, short toe, heels, hawk injections. I took the heels off these horses, slowly, of course. It takes a matter of time. You don't do it at once. But I slowly lowered the heel, and I put a little more toe out on that hind foot. Hawk injections went away. 100%. I would never find absolutes. But so far, that's been an absolute on the horses that I've removed heels on with hawk injections. Losing shoes. That's a good one. Raising the heel, you're going to lose shoes. How do we know that? Well, look at high-low heel horses. High-low heel horse is the best learning experience you have because if you cut that horse and right down through the center longitudinally, you'll usually see two different conformations from shoulders all the way to foot. And what foot loses the shoe? The upright foot. It was the one that loses the shoe. No absolutes, but that's pretty much what you'll find on high-low heel horses. So apply that to other horses. That's why I say the high-low heeled horse teaches you a lot as far as working with other types of conformations. Stumbling. So stumbling, when you raise the heel on a tight-tissued horse, you'll get more of a posture change. If the heel, like upright pasterns or tight tissue, upright limbs, straight shoulder, upright, are usually very tight moving joints, and especially this joint, the pastern joint, the proximal BIP joint, because they're stiff. You have a lower pastern horse, you can flex the heck out of the foot. You just flex it like crazy. So if I put a wedge pad on a stiff flexing horse, I'm going to see a pastern change. A posture change. It usually does this. I don't know if you can see the whole limb, but it brings the knee a little bit forward. With that knee forward, it's breaking earlier. What does that do when the toe's trying to come off the ground? It'll stumble. That stumble comes when the foot's coming off the ground. Lower the heel and you change everything. Bring it back and you have much more movement taking place. Body's discomfort affecting soft tissue, bone, back, and yes, even attitude. When you, as an individual, have a sore foot, your attitude is a little bit adjusted. Same with horses. So keep that in mind. The plane of capsule pitching the foot forward. You notice I'm using the word pitching. I like when it comes to the foot is a three-dimensional object because it has height, width, and length. That makes it a three-dimensional object. There's a rule that they use in aeronautic type of terms, robotics, AI. It's called 6 degrees of freedom. I would suggest that you Google that and look it up because that gives you precise movements of a three-dimensional object. And now we can explain how the horse is standing by using 6 degrees of freedom in yaw, pitch, and roll. And this foot's been pitched forward because the sole plane has been lifted in the heel area. Now, when we apply gravity, because it always wins, we notice that the toe is collapsing. There's a bend developing in the sole plane in the toe area with the heel. Now think about all these laminitic feet that you raise in the heels on stiff pasterns or on stiff moving joints, putting the toe right through the sole because the sole cannot bear the weight. We talk about center of pressure in the foot. That's fun to talk about. But inside the foot, there's all these moving objects. The bone's never steady. And so pressure shifts constantly. And in this case, the pressure is shifted to the toe. So we have to be aware. That's where you'll find pathology can be based on the plane of the P3 bone. Another thing we can see here is an upward bend in the heel area. That's a sheared heel, as they refer to. I prefer to call it a bend in the heel area. When this foot has been trimmed to the sole plane, We have now ground level. That's very good for the foot. It's stability. But as you can see, this foot has a upward bend in the sole plane because the heels were causing the sole to sag in that area, causing the bend to migrate upward. Plane of capsule review. All right, we'll do a quick review here. Extra hoof wall elevating the foot. Now we've just brought the foot down to a horizontal plane or ground level, but we still have our distorted heel. That won't go away immediately. But we've also increased the base. So we're giving this foot more stability on how it stands on its foot, more feeling. This horse can have a problem in the toe. It's not going to want to be happy. The other foot's a much happier horse. So developing pathologies. The red represents the sole arch, and that blue represents the sole plane. And if you notice, everything is at ground level. Again, this is where you find feet that are functioning well. Now, this doesn't come, just my opinion, although maybe I shouldn't have said that. This is 60 years of looking at feet. And these are patterns that I see in feet. Look at feet that are functioning well, and you'll probably see this type of pattern developing in that foot. It's telling us something. It's the one you never see in lectures because they're pretty good shape. But when we raise the heel, we're getting a collapsed toe arch or a sole drop, anterior sole drop. When we raise the heel, everything increases. Go back to thinking about laminitic horses and raising the heel. All the tissue's already breaking down. And so if you have an upright pastern horse and you raise the heel, you're really going to destroy that foot in the toe area. We must be careful on what we do to protect the internal structures. You have a collapsed toe arch right there, or a anterior sole drop. Very, very hard on feet to raise a heel. And does this look familiar? One nice thing about this is that when a woman wears a high-heeled shoe all day long and she comes home, the first thing that she does is remove her shoes because she wants to be comfortable again. So identifying the angle changes to the hoof capsule based on the heel. So here we have a raised foot, 55-degree angle. When you lower the heel, you increase the base, but the angle change you'll get. Our eye is so focused on that toe. We have to cut the toe short. We have to dress the toe back. Why do we get fixated on things like this? Like the deep flexor tendon. Why are we so fixated on that when there's so many things that counter that? It's just how our industry works. So there's no change internal to the internal measurements. Toe, figure A, toe will appear short, and figure B, the toe will be long. But there's no change internally. Well, if we went to major detail, we could probably say something about that. So frog wall junction. The widest part of the frog can be in the eye of the beholder. So let's look at the moisture content in the sole may fluctuate. It is possible for the sole body to be thicker in the toe area than in the heel. Thicker in the heel area than in the toe area, altering the moisture line. Trimming length of wall in the heel area may stabilize the moisture line in time and align the frog wall junction. I'm starting to get a little bit tired, I think, sitting here talking this. So let's do this. We're talking about, again, get me back here on screen. This is a hoof capsule, dried out old hoof capsule that's been trimmed to the sole plane. See, that's the capsule. That's the foot right there. Get me in front of my camera. Now, let's look at the bottom of the foot. You see how wide open the toe is right here? So this is exposed to ground or to heat. Moisture is attracted to heat. So this can dry out pretty decent. But the heels are trapped into this tight little area where am I? Over here. This tight little area. You have your bar and your wall. So that's a tight area. The longer your heel gets, the tighter that gets, and the more moisture it holds. It's not a lot of times healthy moisture, but it's moisture. So when you lower heels, you can only go so much before you notice that the tissue is getting soft. You have to quit at that point. If that's not taking you to the frog wall junction, don't go to the frog wall junction. So just go slow in lowering your heels. And put it on a more regular base. Because once you're on a regular base, this heel's left open more and has a chance to dry down, and then your moisture line will level off inside the foot. You'll have more of a even moisture line going through your sole, and that way you can trim then to your frog wall junction. So the frog wall junction is a guide. It's not an absolute. So just bear in mind that you have to adjust the foot slowly, dry the sole down in the heel area so it will align to the frog wall junction. Trimming to the compression wrinkle. This is an old. So compression wrinkle is where the wall would collapse a little bit. This is an old trimming thing. They talked about it a few years ago. To me, a few years ago, it might have been 20. It's the way it is. Anyway, so what it does not address how the horse is standing on his foot and can alter posture. This trim can produce unequal heel lengths, and we can see right there. And then when we look at the trim and heel length to the frog wall junction, they're not equal either. Here's a fun little thing. A good friend of mine, Domenico, and I in Italy had a chance to do this with some of his equipment. So if you notice, there's two markers set at the frog wall junction. Now remember, we're looking at a radiograph. Two markers at a frog wall junction. This is our commissure depth. The markers on the bottom are at the end of the hoof wall, and so that's extra heel length. So that's extended wall length on this foot. If we trim to the frog wall junction, we notice that it aligns with everything else we've been talking about. So now you can look at a radiograph and know where a heel can trim. Caution always taken. Can we trim the heel to that point today? Maybe not. So we always have to use caution and time and regular trimmings to achieve that point. Lateral heel, cadaver. This is a cadaver specimen used for research purposes only. So we've taken a foot before trim. We've identified, we put a window in the foot. There's our dense epidermal sole, our excess sole, and our moisture line. This is the lateral heel. Looking at the lateral heel again by cleaning out excess sole, we now can see how this horse is standing on his capsule. And by trimming to the ground level, we now have this horse on ground level. So let's look at the medial foot. The medial foot before trim, after trim. I'd also like to point out how shiny this wall is in the heel area. That's a warning sign. Keratinized tissue should be dull in color. And when it's shiny like that, there's usually a sign of stress taking place. But we can see that there's our dense epidermal sole, our excess sole, and our moisture line. When we put our window in the foot, we can see how this foot now is pitched backwards because the toe length is longer than the heel length. and our horizontally planed hoof capsule or hoof wall at ground level. So let's look at ground level, how this is the same horse or the same foot. Keep that in mind, this is the same foot. That's the medial, looking at the medial side and the lateral side. And there's the angles. Now, can you understand how feet can become twisted? The capsules can twist this way due to the shifting of the unsteady base that this foot has been placed under. And that's trimmed to the sole plane. They're both together. They're both standing on a good sound base. Anatomy does not display symmetry. That's an important statement. Anatomy does not display symmetry. So for those of you that want to make everything cosmetically pleasing and symmetrical, remember you're going against anatomy. 50-50 trim. I just threw this in here for fun. So here we have, now I got these standards off the literature. The widest part of the foot. Remember earlier we said that the widest part of the foot is usually a sign of internal load. And you can see it in the commissure area, how this is being pressed down from internally. Then we have the trim to the cleft, back of the cleft. So that's a 50-50 trim. And then the tip of the P3 bone is supposedly there, which is close. I could never say in a foot, with my experience, I could never say anything is where it should be, because there's always things that can change that if I say it. So this is the area where it usually is. And then they want to call this breakover. And that's your heel trim into that area there. So let's dissect this foot out. Oh, the 50-50 does not address the true foot. So here's the foot before trim. Here's our window. There's our dense epidermal sole. There's our excess sole. And there's our moisture line. If we look before trim and after trim. So that little bit of heel that's left on there, I'm sure it'd probably be safe, but it's not detail. And this foot's actually standing better with that little bit of heel off. Then we have a before trim and after trim. This is the medial side, dense epidermal sole, excess sole, moisture line. So when we detail this foot out, there's before trim, there's after trim. I don't know about you, but I see a better heel developing on that after trim than I do on the medial, on the before trim. That's a strong heel, although it does show a little bit of upward bend in the heel area. So we'd like to prevent that, the sole plane from bending upward. Hoof angles of the toe and heel area. So there's our toe angle, here's our heel angle. Now, it is common for the heel angle to be within a range of 0 to 10 degrees less than the toe angle. Dr. John Craig and Monique Craig did a study. On their study, they measured 230 hoofs. It's universal agreement in the literature that from the lateral aspect of the hoof and heel should ideally be parallel. That's what the literature says. The standard deviation in the data was 8.3 degrees. If the difference between hoof and heel angle is as much as 10 degrees, it is not an abnormal situation. Now, both Dr. Craig and Monique Craig realized that these horses were from a group of all around the world, most likely. They have all different farriers trimming them, and this is just what the results came up with on heel angle. Review, elevating the heel. Evaluating the heel, excuse me. By the end of the lectures, I get pretty tired. So this is before trim. This is after, or with the sole plane identified and our hoof capsule. Now we have our after trim removing length of wall. And there's our horizontally planed hoof capsule and ground level plane. Length of wall on figure B. There's our length of wall. There's our ground level trim. But this foot is experiencing an upward bend in the sole plane in the heel area. So let's compare the 2 feet. The vertical depth are different. The angle of the heel are different. Both are standing on a sound base, but the internal angles are different. So what we're looking at is 2 different heel types. We could say a quarter horse and a thoroughbred. So why do we want to take a thoroughbred or a low-heeled horse that's naturally its development and try to make it look to please our eye? We need to please the horse. Now, let's look at this foot. A horse has no heel. That's a typical statement you would hear. Or this foot needs heel. Well, let's look internally. So we've removed a lot of the tissue to see what we're looking at, to find the heel area in there. And if you notice that the bulbs are outside of this, lifting out of this heel. This is common. I don't know if we can do much about that. I do know that people like to cast feet now, and if you cast a foot and put a shoe on it, it's quite possible to pull the bulbs out of the heel area. So I'd be quite aware of that. I've had to work on a few horses like that when it was popular to cast feet, way back in the 80s probably in Southern California. So be careful with your casting. But there's our hairline and our hoof wall. You notice how the skin is all stretched and pulled upward. Here's our foot with the wall removed. And there's your internal heel angle. So what's wrong with this foot? That's a decent heel for this type of foot. And we have a capsule on a horizontal plane or ground level. Now, something very critical, and this is one of my main goals in shoeing horses, is a level sole plane. So the distal border of the sole in attachment to the white line is horizontally planed. Distal border of the sole is distortion free. Take a close look at this. This should be a goal. And you realize if we have goals, not standards, but goals to work towards, then farriers and veterinarians and horse owners, if they understand the goals, they all work well together to achieve those goals. So here we have a foot with the sole plane bending downward. Draw a straight line. So the sole plane is below the trim line. So if you were to trim this foot level, like we're taught, you're going to be thinning a lot of this foot, changing the mechanics of this foot. Here we have a sole bending upward. So when we look here, you can see an upward bend in the sole plane. So these are just different things that occur when we let the foot get out of control. Trimming horses every 5 weeks and beyond really isn't beneficial for the horse. Maybe some horses could handle that, but majority of horses, especially if they're working, if they're performance horses, need very regular trimming and shoeing work done to them to maintain and control the foot. So trimming a level hoof wall may thin the sole and does not address distortion. Trimming the sole plane. Now this is a very rough foot. I put it in here on purpose. So this is before trim. We've removed the tissue. We've trimmed it to the sole plane. Now I wouldn't recommend trimming this foot at first to the sole plane. Keep that clear. Make it very clear. Because look at the tissue in the acetocorn area. That's not ready. You see bone loading around the frog, on both sides of the frog, the dark spots. That's all bone loading. The bone's loading in the toe area. The little bruises, the red spots you see is bone loading the sole. This foot needs a lot of help. It was terribly neglected. This is trimmed for a demonstration. But it's not trimmed for a live horse until that foot's ready to trim to these points. So here's our sole plane. There's our frog wall junction. There's our length of wall in the heel area. If we look at this foot after trim, we can see that the white line of the bar matches the white line of the wall, especially in the seat of corn area. That's generally how you find your heel. But let me repeat, this heel was not ready. The tissue is telling you not to trim to that point. It's not ready to trim there yet. And when we look at the other side, we can see that the white line is not equal. That's too much heel you're taking off. Match your white lines and it'll usually trim out to the frog wall junction. Yeah, but again, be careful until you understand how important it is to read these heels correctly. Same foot. Look at our heel angle. After trim, it's been trimmed to the sole plane. And there's our vertical depth in the heel. There's our sole thinning. You notice how this bone's in a positive palmar angle because it has deep commissures and a flatter toe arch. So putting our P3 positive palmar angle, we're getting poor nutrition in the toe area and it's thinning. And in the heel area, it's remodeling because the bone's pushing into the heel area. So we see sensitive lamina to the distal border is keratinizing. The white line is increasing, but the sensitive lamina is decreasing. This will affect bone and cartilage. Hoof wall trim to the sole plane. Is it really a club foot or a foot type? I should reread that, like as I'm getting tired, but is it really a club foot or a foot type? It's a horizontally planed hoof capsule. But that's the true foot of this horse today. Morphology is the study of shape. Morphology in a horse's foot is just a moment in time, because it can change. So thank you very much. It probably went a little longer than I wanted it to, and I'm sorry I'm tired, and I got a little bit distracted a few times, but all in all, I hope you enjoy this. Thank you very much.